There's a particular kind of silence that follows a great performance. Not applause, not critical praise, something older than that. The silence of a room that has just witnessed something it can't fully explain. Something that felt less like acting and more like exposure. Like watching a person come undone in real time. Heath Ledger gave us that silence twice. Once in a tent on a fictional mountain in Wyoming. Once in a dark room, painted white, laughing at a man who couldn't kill him. And both times, the performance cost him something he never fully got back. This essay isn't about the roles, it's about the transaction. What Ledger surrendered in order to tell the truth, and whether the truth, in the end, was worth the price. Let's start where most actors don't have the luxury of starting, at the top. In 1999, Heath Ledger arrives in Hollywood at 20 years old, and Hollywood immediately decides what he is. He's the jawline, the smirk, the one the camera just follows without being asked. He's Patrick Verona in 10 Things I Hate About You, charming, dangerous, safe enough for a PG-13 poster. And the machine loves him for it. But here's the thing about machines. They don't ask you what you want to become. They assign you a function. And the function Hollywood assigned Heath Ledger was heartthrob. Profitable, repeatable, disposable. What followed was a collision between an industry that wanted to define him and a man who refused the definition. He turned down Spider-Man. Not because the money wasn't right, because he was afraid, viscerally afraid, of becoming a brand instead of an actor. He had watched what fame did to a person up close during the promotional tour for A Knight's Tale, when his face was plastered across every corner of Los Angeles with the words, "He will rock you." His own agent described it. He wanted fame, and then when he got it, he didn't want it. He was mortified, and he felt owned. So Ledger did something that almost no actor at his stage of career dares to do. He torched the trajectory. He took Monsters Ball, a suffocating drama where he played a suicidal prison guard, a role so far from the teen idol runway that it functioned as a public declaration, a demolition. He later described this period with striking self-awareness. He said he had gotten bored, not with the choices he was making, but with the fact that choices were being made for him. Projects were being thrown at him. So, as he put it, I kind of put the brakes on that. In a sense, I destroyed my career to rebuild it again. That line is not a complaint. It's a manifesto. Because what Ledger was articulating, what he was beginning to build, was a psychological architecture for his craft. One where the actor doesn't perform the character. The actor becomes the site where the character is constructed. And to do that, he needed material that was harder. Roles that couldn't be played from the outside. Roles that demanded something somatic, something physical and irreversible. He found that in a Wyoming field, on top of a mountain that doesn't exist. Brokeback Mountain is often discussed as a cultural milestone, a turning point in how Hollywood depicted queer love. And it is all of that. But as a pure study in acting, it's something even rarer. It's a masterclass in what we might call somatic truth. The idea that emotional states can be encoded not into words or facial expressions, but into the architecture of the body itself. To understand what Ledger did as Ennis Del Mar, you have to understand the character's fundamental condition. Ennis is a man who cannot speak what he feels. Not because he's inarticulate, but because the world he lives in has taught him that speaking it would destroy him. So instead, he compresses. He stores it somewhere below the throat. Ang Lee has described how Ledger kept his teeth clenched and his face locked for essentially the entire duration of filming. Not as a technique, as a state. A chronic physical bracing against the emotional pressure underneath. The jaw, the sunken posture, the way his eyes dart to the side rather than hold a gaze, all of it is a body refusing to let the inside out. His voice in the film is extraordinary precisely because of what it costs Ennis to produce it. Every word feels swallowed before it's spoken. Every sentence seems to arrive having already survived its own suppression. That mumble isn't a character choice. It's a physiological consequence of a man who has been silencing himself since childhood. One moment, described by his co-star Anne Hathaway, captures this better than any critical analysis can. During a scene where Ennis walks away from Jack, Ledger's character was scripted to cry against a wall. Instead, he turned the corner and punched the brick with his full strength, nearly breaking his hand. That's not method acting, that's visceral anarchy. An actor so fused with a character's internal pressure that the boundary between what's scripted and what's felt simply dissolves. Todd Haynes, who directed Ledger in I'm Not There, described what he did in Brokeback this way. The entire emotional power of the film lives inside Ledger's restraint. He doesn't release the grief, he holds it, and by holding it, he forces the audience to fill in the space, to grieve for him, because he cannot grieve for himself. The performance earned him his first Oscar nomination. He didn't win, but the nomination was almost beside the point, because something more important had happened. Heath Ledger had discovered what he was capable of when he stopped performing and started inhabiting. And once an actor discovers that, once they feel that particular kind of truth, they cannot go back to anything smaller. The next role would not ask him to compress, it would ask him to explode. Christopher Nolan cast Heath Ledger as the Joker before the script for The Dark Knight was finished. This is important. It means Ledger wasn't handed a character. He was handed an absence, a blank page with a name on it. And what he did with that absence is one of the most radical acts of identity deconstruction in modern cinema. He checked into a hotel room in London, alone, for approximately 6 weeks. No set, no director, no co-stars, just Heath Ledger and whatever he was building in the dark. He began a journal, what became known as the Joker Diary. He filled it with images, with written fragments, with psychological profiles of chaos. He studied A Clockwork Orange and traced the architecture of Alex DeLarge's moral vacancy. He looked at the paintings of Francis Bacon, faces distorted, flesh pulled apart from within, and used them as a visual grammar for decay. He experimented with voices, not to find the right pitch, but to find the right mind. He described landing in the territory of a psychopath, someone with zero conscience toward their own acts, not a villain who knows they're evil, a force that simply doesn't register the category. Nolan has described how Ledger was studying ventriloquist dummies, the way the voice seems to come from somewhere else, from a body that isn't fully alive. He practiced mouthing his dialogue and letting the sound arrive slightly after the lips, creating a dissociated, unhoused quality to every word the Joker speaks. What emerged wasn't a character, it was a frequency. The Joker doesn't walk into a room, he infects it. Every gesture is slightly wrong. Every pause is placed exactly where no sane person would place it. And then there's the licking of the lips, that constant, wet, reptilian flicker of the tongue. What most audiences assume was a deliberate character choice was actually something more poetic. The prosthetic on his mouth kept detaching when he spoke. Rather than stop for makeup repairs, Ledger started licking his lips to keep it in place, and then realized what it was doing to the character. He didn't solve the problem. He turned it into the character's most iconic tick, a flaw in the machine, transformed into psychological signature. Then there's the jailhouse scene. Sitting alone in his cell, Gordon is promoted in the room beyond the glass, and the Joker, unprompted, unscripted, begins to clap. Slowly, with handcuffed wrists. The mockery of it is devastating. Nolan loved it and kept it. These aren't just improvisations. They're the fingerprints of a mind that has been so fully rewired by the character that the character begins to generate its own behavior. That is what makes this performance categorically different from other great villain portrayals. Jack Nicholson played the Joker as theater, controlled, external, deliciously presentational. Cesar Romero played him as camp. Both are valid, both are performances. What Ledger did wasn't a performance. It was a mental virus, something he installed into his own nervous system and then allowed to replicate. He didn't direct the Joker, he created the conditions for the Joker to direct him. Christian Bale, who spent weeks filming the interrogation scene with Ledger, described watching him slam himself into tiled walls hard enough to crack them. Bale tried to convince him they didn't have to hit each other for real. Ledger kept saying, "Go on, go on." There's a word for that level of commitment. It isn't bravery. It isn't even dedication. It's something closer to merger. The boundary between the actor and the character had stopped being functional. If you haven't subscribed to MovieScale yet, this is the moment. hit the button below. We do this kind of deep dive every week, and we're just getting started. In early 2007, while The Dark Knight was still in production, Heath Ledger sat down for an interview with the New York Times. And what he described wasn't a man at the height of his powers. It was a man who couldn't sleep. He told the interviewer he had averaged 2 hours of sleep a night for the previous week. His mind wouldn't stop. He described taking one Ambien, finding it insufficient, taking another, and still waking after an hour. His body was exhausted. His mind was still running. Michelle Williams, who had known him intimately for years, described it this way. His mind was always turning, always in motion. For as long as I'd known him, he had bouts with insomnia. He had too much energy. But there's a distinction between the insomnia Ledger had before the Joker and what it became during production. His ex-partner described it as having existed for years. What the Joker did was not create the condition, it accelerated it. Took something already fragile and applied maximum pressure. The metabolic toll of sustaining a character defined by volatility, a character who exists in a constant state of anarchic electricity, on a body that was already fighting to rest, was profound. He couldn't decompress, couldn't locate the exit from the frequency he had dialed into. When he moved on to his final film, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, Christopher Plummer watched him fighting a respiratory illness, walking pneumonia, while simultaneously battling the inability to sleep. He was taking various medications to manage both. The machine was running on override. On January 22, 2008, before The Dark Knight had been seen by a single audience member, Heath Ledger was found unconscious in his apartment. The autopsy confirmed accidental overdose, a combination of 6 prescription medications. He was 28 years old. In the aftermath, the question the media immediately reached for was, did the Joker kill him? And his sister Kate stood in front of cameras and said plainly, he was having fun. He wasn't depressed about the Joker. His co-star Bale confirmed it. By all accounts, Ledger considered the performance one of the most joyful experiences of his career. He was already planning to return in a sequel. So the answer isn't simple. The Joker didn't kill Heath Ledger. But it is also impossible to look at the documented state of his body and mind during those final months. The sleeplessness, the chemical dependency, the inability to metabolize the chaos he had invited in, and conclude that the performance cost nothing. The machine ran until it stopped. And what it produced in its final hours was something that will still be running long after any of us are here to watch it. Here is what Heath Ledger changed. Before The Dark Knight, superhero films were not considered serious candidates for serious acting awards. They were spectacle, commerce dressed as art. His Joker walked into that assumption and set it on fire. He won the Academy Award posthumously, becoming only the second actor in history to receive that honor after death. But the legacy isn't really the Oscar. The legacy is a question that the performance permanently installed into the culture. What does a performer owe a role? Watch Austin Butler talk about Elvis. Watch how he describes not being able to find his own voice for months after filming. That's not a coincidence. That's the Ledger template, the actor as vessel, the role as something that gets inside and rearranges the furniture. The difference is that Butler came out the other side. And part of what we're confronting when we study Ledger, what makes him impossible to simply celebrate without complication, is that the method of total identity surrender carries a cost that no rehearsal prepares you for. Because here's the paradox at the center of everything he did. The very qualities that made Ledger extraordinary, the restless mind, the inability to disengage, the refusal to stay on the surface of anything, were the same qualities that made him vulnerable. His greatest strength was his fracture point. He didn't play the Joker. He allowed the Joker to colonize him. And what we see on screen is not an actor in costume. It is the record of that colonization. A document of what happens when a human being voluntarily installs chaos into their own psychological architecture, and then cannot find the uninstall button. Some performances are gifts. Brokeback Mountain is a gift, aching, beautiful, given freely. But the Joker is something else. The Joker is a transmission, received from somewhere, sent through Ledger, broadcast to everyone who has ever sat in a dark room and watched it, and still, impossible to locate the source. He told an interviewer once, when asked what a movie about his life would look like, "I think it would be a pretty boring movie." He was wrong. Of course he was wrong. The movie has been playing on repeat since 2008. And every time someone watches The Dark Knight and that laugh fills the room, that ventriloquist dummy unhoused arriving from elsewhere laugh, Heath Ledger is still in that hotel room, still constructing the thing, still pouring himself into the absence, still burning, still burning. That's Heath Ledger, the icon of chaos. If this essay made you see his work differently, or made you need to go back and watch it all over again, that's exactly what it was meant to do. Drop a comment below. Tell me which performance stays with you. And if you're new here, welcome to MovieScale. Subscribe and hit the bell. We do this every week. Deep dives, character studies, the kind of cinema analysis that takes the film apart to find what's beating inside it. Until next time.